1984 was a huge year for film, seeing the release of such cult classics as The Terminator, Ghostbusters, Gremlins, The Karate Kid, This Is Spinal Tap, and Beverly Hills Cop. Prince released his masterpiece, Purple Rain, while Metallica released their monster album, Ride the Lightning. But all this paled in comparison to the World Wrestling Federation rising to sports entertainment supremacy with the phenomenon known as Hulkamania. Vince McMahon signed the top stars from all the major territories and began to unveil his vision. Join us on this trip as we journey back to 1984. Without question, 1984 was best known for the return of a man that would become arguably the most popular wrestler of all time. During a match in which former champion Bob Backlund was outnumbered by the Wild Samoans, the one and only Hulk Hogan would emerge from the locker room to save the day. Backlund would go on to claim that Hogan had changed his evil ways and officially endorsed him as the next big star. On January 23rd, inside the infamous Madison Square Garden, Hogan would indeed defeat WWF champion the Iron Sheik in one of the most famous title wins in company history. The celebration would continue in the locker room, with Andre the Giant pouring champagne over the new champion. Mean Gene would introduce the Hulkster's parents, who were in town to celebrate this monumentous occasion. Hogan would hang on to the title for the entire year, with his biggest challenger being Big John Studd in main events across the country. Hogan successfully defended the WWF Championship across the country against the likes of Dr. D. David Schultz, Greg the Hammer Valentine, and former champion the Iron Sheik. The Hulkster even had a hand in training Hillbilly Jim for his in-ring debut. Amazingly, Hogan even trained Mean Gene for a victorious tag bout against George the Animal Steele and Mr. Fuji. While the company gained a hero, it would also gain a devious villain that would become the new standard for a wrestling heel. Initially debuting as the manager of Mr. Wonderful Paul Orndorff, Rowdy Roddy Piper would transition into not only an in-ring competitor, but would introduce the world to his controversial talk show. Piper's Pit was the scene for some of the most controversial moments of the year. From confronting Andre the Giant to embarrassing and annihilating enhancement talent Frankie Williams, Piper certainly had a knack for creating all-out mayhem. But it was one specific episode of The Pit that solidified Piper as a living legend. The night he cracked a coconut over the head of Superfly Jimmy Snuka. Piper and Snuka would go on to battle across the country, with Cowboy Bob Orton having Piper's back, while newcomer the Tonga Kid assisted the Superfly. The most heated feud of the year began due to a simple misunderstanding. The Iron Sheik and Sergeant Slaughter got into an argument in the aisle on an episode of Championship Wrestling, trying to figure out who was booked for the next showcase match. Things would get personal between the two once Sheik denounced America, which didn't sit well with the patriotic Slaughter, who declared war. The two would face off twice, with issues going unresolved, and even resulting in a melee backstage at Madison Square Garden that even involved Vince McMahon trying to separate the two. This feud could only be resolved in an all-out war, which occurred on June 16th in Madison Square Garden, contested in a boot camp match. Blood was spilled and the result was an underrated classic, with Slaughter emerging as the victor. For most of the year, Tito Santana laid claim to the Intercontinental Championship, capturing it from Don Morocco early in the year. Santana would go on to have excellent title defenses against Cowboy Bob Orton and Mr. Wonderful Paul Orndorff, but one man tested the champion to his limits. Greg the Hammer Valentine challenged Santana on a handful of occasions, even headlining in Madison Square Garden. But it would be on the fateful October 13th edition of Championship Wrestling that Valentine would unleash his master plan. Valentine attacked the champion prior to the match, knowing full well that Santana would tough it out and fight anyway. The end result? Valentine became the new Intercontinental Champion. WWF Tag Team Champions Rocky Johnson and Tony Atlas started the year as the title holders, but met their match by the time May came around. The rough and tough Adrian Adonis and Dick Murdoch won the straps, taking on all comers for the rest of the year, from the Briscoe brothers to the Wild Samoans. The year featured several debuts from future legends, including the likes of Kamala, Brutus Beefcake, the Junkyard Dog, Bret Hart, Hillbilly Jim, and a brief appearance by the Fabulous Freebirds. Also debuting this year was Tuesday Night Titans, a talk show hosted by Vince McMahon along with his co-host, Lord Alfred Hayes. The show featured interviews, pre-taped matches, and comedic segments, gravitating wrestling in a completely different direction. Memorable segments featured Paul Orndorff inside of a salon berating the staff, Vince McMahon accepting an induction on behalf of his father into the Madison Square Garden Hall of Fame, former Olympian Ken Patera holding back a running van with his legs, and Adonis and Murdoch visiting each other's homes and proving just how different they were. The most memorable episode, however, was the sight of Butcher Vachon's wedding, with the entire episode being devoted to the most outlandish wedding and reception in company history. Arguably the greatest manager of all time, Bobby the Brain Heenan made his debut in September. He wasted no time making a name for himself, backing Big John Studd and honing in on Hulk Hogan. On July 14th, viewers tuning into TBS were in for a huge surprise as Vince McMahon graced the coveted 6:05 time slot to introduce his new brand of entertainment. The day would go on to be referred to as Black Saturday. McMahon accomplished this task by purchasing Georgia Championship Wrestling from Jack and Jerry Briscoe. Ratings plummeted, with fans of the NWA clamoring for their familiar brand of pro wrestling. McMahon sold off his time slot, ushering in the wildly successful Crockett era of World Championship Wrestling. Andre the Giant continued to be a global attraction, living up to his moniker of the eighth wonder of the world. Andre feuded with Kamala, resulting in a steel cage match inside the Maple Leaf Gardens on October 21st. By the end of the year, Big John Studd was challenging the Giant in a battle for supremacy. In an angle that would continue into the following year, Studd deeply angered Andre by orchestrating an attack on him on the December 1st Championship Wrestling. With the help of fellow Heenan family member Ken Patera, Studd would do the unthinkable. He cut the signature mane of Andre and carried the hair around with him in a Ziploc bag. The biggest storyline of the year surrounded award-winning recording artist Cyndi Lauper and would be the precursor to the most important show in the company's history. On the May 12th Piper's Pit, Captain Lou Albano made claim that he was the reason for Lauper's success, to which Lauper would refute. Piper would confront Lauper in her studio on June 23rd alongside manager David Wolf. What resulted was a verbal confrontation and a challenge laid. Lauper claimed she would find a woman's wrestler if Albano could do the same and they'd attempt to settle their issues. Albano would pick WWF Women's Champion the Fabulous Moolah, while Lauper chose up-and-comer Wendy Richter. The match took place on July 23rd in Madison Square Garden, with Richter upsetting Moolah to become the new champion. Albano and Lauper would eventually mend fences, which didn't set well with Piper. On December 28th in Madison Square Garden, Albano presented Lauper with a gold record, which sent the Hot Rod in a rage, shoving Lauper and smashing the record over Albano's head. Who would make Piper pay for his dastardly acts? Find out next time on Squared Circle History.